model it is, we have this notion of compromising the line items. It's compromising the milestone. Okay, so this gives us kind of another element in the model, the milestone invalidator. So with every milestone, you can talk about what are the ways it goes true, and you can talk about what are the ways that it can be compromised, or what are the ways it can be invalidated. Okay, so basically it's an event condition, event and or condition, and what it does is it sets the milestone attribute to false. Okay, so it's not a monotonic system. It's not monotonic. Okay, where things will go true, but then because of some event, I may have to make some things false.
So is this anything like exception handling in programming languages?
There's a relationship, yes. The point is that some of, like one man's exception is another man's nice piece of code that he's building in. And so this is not really at the level of exception handling, because we're allowing that the top level model, or kind of the base model, includes this kind of invalidation. It includes, this may trigger some more things. This guard may be based on, it's not in this example, but it might be based on the fact that some milestone has gone false. Okay, and so we're dealing with, quote, this exception directly in the model, up at the first class level. In that way, it's a little different philosophically than exception handling. Okay. Finally, let's talk about atomic stages. Okay. So, when do we actually do any work? This is all about kind of organizing at a high level when things can open, when things can close, etc. When are we actually going to do work? We're going to do work in atomic stages. Okay. Atomic stages, they have a task inside. What does the task do? It's going to read data from the data attributes, and later, typically human speed. Okay. Typically human speed. It's going to write some attributes later. Okay. Good. Now we have a notion of read blocks and write blocks at the level of these attributes and at the level of the human speed, but I'd rather, if it's okay, I'd rather not go into that today. Okay. Just know there's some aspect of kind of transactional consistency at the level of the human speed tasks. All right. But anyway, I think now I've got, so a little more on the ECA rules. So if the guard goes through here and I open up this atomic stage, okay, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go tell the environment to start doing this task. So you could think of these as services outside in an SOA world. I'm invoking the task as a two-way message to invoke the task. Later on, an event will come back in telling me that the task is completed. Okay, so if I open this stage, then I'm going to invoke the task. I'm going to tell the environment to do something. And then the task returned is viewed as an incoming event. So I'm kind of viewing them all as asynchronous in some sense. Okay? And it's one of the ways I might close the stage. There might be another way to close the stage, but one way I might close the stage is the task ends, and that is a triggering event for some milestone there. Okay, I think I'm done with the model. Let me just skip over this beautiful analogy. So let me go back here for a second. Okay, questions about the model? Let's just take a second and see if I've lost everybody with all these crazy constructs. Yeah.
It's really nice. What's the granularity of the model? Are you modeling at the individual level or at the aggregate level? I can imagine a lot of business processes where you're actually, you've got 1,000
yes.
individuals going through. And so you don't want the milestone to be that when all 1,000 have completed that
right.
stage. But if you don't do that, then there's a burden on modeling the individuals. And of course there are ways around that. But I wonder whether you've thought about that and whether.
Right. Our general focus in the modeling is at the individual Bell instance level. So we're thinking, I kind of draw this, but when I start talking about operationally, I'm saying, I've got one procurement order or one requisition order instance. And all of this discussion, all these ECA rules, etc., we think of them as being modeled just one instance at a time. Now, you might say, my goodness, if I've got 10,000 of these things, how could I possibly do it efficiently?
And I can imagine that some things you want to model at the aggregate level and some things you want to model at the individual level. So I don't want to ship the car until all of its individual pieces are here and assembled, and yet I want to talk about the aggregate, but I also need to talk about each of those individual pieces being
Right.
somehow. So I can imagine wanting to have the two.
Right now, okay. Of course, keep in mind that this, for example, is keeping track of all the procurement orders in
Right.
this one instance. And yes, some condition somewhere, like this condition, might be, I only get to proceed when all these procurement orders are done. So we have collection types here, and then we can use that. So one kind of thing we can test is say a universal quantifier over all these guys, which would mean, kind of going down to a collection, a specific collection of the procurement order
Right.
instances. We can also talk about unbounded quantification, by the way, but yeah.
One question, like if these models become big for the real-world process, is there some safety procedures that you can use? For example, like if all my small atomic tasks can modify data, do they have scopes or something that they only can modify a certain certain types of data? So, like in a programming language, you would have scopes for variables or scopes for classes. Is there some similar concept to?
Well, there's a lot of scoping structure that's built in here. So first off, all of this is really only talking about this one requisition order instance. Now, further, as it turns out, this requisition instance might be, associated with several line item instances and several procurement order instances. And typically, the only conditions I can do are test things that I can reach through what's kind of here. So the only, in this setup, this particular example application, it's this one guy, it's the line items that are related, and it's the procurement orders that are related, and that ends up being the scope of just everything that I care about. And this requisition order instance will never really impact some other requisition instance. That's step one. Step two is that really the stages are giving us some additional scoping. Okay, in that, we could look at this stage and we could, let's start with the atomic stages. It turns out there is a read set and a write set associated with this task. Okay, so that's giving me kind of a scoping of things. And then, okay, there's some details I don't really want to go into, but you can talk about read sets and write sets for the whole, the larger stages as well. So there's a variety of things kind of built in to give us some scoping.
And if I would try to access something that's not in the read and write set, then I would get an...
Yeah, somehow this task wouldn't be able to. I mean, of course I want to leave out some details here. These tasks being human speed often is actually a human being at the other end, and maybe the interface is just limiting him that he can only see that much was given to him at the beginning, and he's only able to write into this zone here, and that's all his web browser lets him write into. So, that stuff could be built into the overall framework. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the milestones being compromised. Do you want to stop modeling at that level, or because there might be commitments involved in achieving a milestone, and then people backing off on their commitments, and people have worked on modeling these kinds of things.
Right. When a milestone becomes compromised, of course there might be a side effect, like I already shipped the book and then I realized the guy's credit card was bogus. Okay, so that's an example of I've had a real world side effect and somehow I want to undo it. So sometimes you want to have a compensating action, and we would typically think about modeling that in as some more stages. Sometimes you might do a rework. Maybe you'd say, oh, the guy, his credit card bounced, but maybe I can call him up and maybe I can get a different credit card number. Okay, so that might be a rework in some sense, or there might be a workaround. So we haven't really explored, say, the different patterns of what to do with the compromised milestones in a systematic way. We've just had some little examples and thought about it. But definitely we feel that the compromise milestone is very important for the business guys to be able to specify what happens, what should happen if it's not completely sunny day, what happens if a milestone is compromised. So that's why we have it that accessible in the model. I'm going to press on now. I'm going to skip this beautiful analogy. So here's the deal. What we imagine is the model I was describing is at what we call the solution designer level. It's kind of like at the analogous to the relational database model. Okay? You don't really show the relational database model to your user population. Okay? That's more for the DBA to think about. What do you show to the user population? You show them entity relationship diagramming. Okay? So what's the analog of entity relationship diagramming for us? Okay? And that's an active pursuit in my group at IBM Research. Okay? And we talk about things like defining the business entities kind of at a high level, and then defining key milestones. Key milestones, not the stages, not the cars, just what are the key milestones? And we start talking about scenarios of those milestones. What is the typical path through the milestones that happens? What's the sunny day path? What's the rainy day path? Okay, so you're kind of like giving pieces of the design, not the whole design. Okay, so we'll have that. We'll have maybe some business rules. Okay, maybe some intuitive model, whatever. Whatever these guys are doing, typically it starts out, it's more intuitive, it's imprecise, and it's incomplete. Okay? That's just the world that we're going to have to be living in. For starters, the beginning of designing a GSM schema is intuitive, imprecise, incomplete. Okay? Now, then what happens is, you iterate and you try to get down and finally get to a GSM schema. Okay? So in the end, we get there. So this is where we're getting some verification problems of interest, of real practical interest. Because, just to be clear here, the beauty of being right in the middle of IBM is we have real users who are using the first generation of this business entity stuff with the finite state machines. And we already have a lot of experience with them, and they don't like finite state machines. They want something else. They want this kind of intuitive stuff. Okay? So we have a sense of the real, what the customer really wants, what they'll pay for, in essence. So what are some questions here? Like, obviously the guy wrote down a scenario. Eventually, the solutions designer creates a GSM schema. Well, does the schema support the scenario? Beautiful question. Okay. Does the GSM model comply with some business rules? Don't ship the book until after the payment. Does the GSM model behave like kind of the full business level model, once I take all the scenarios together? Or there's also kind of not so much business issues, but more technology issues like, is it always going to terminate? Okay, is something reachable? Can deadlocks happen? So good. So now I've given you some verification problems, and unfortunately my time is almost up. But we're good. We can keep going.
What we can do, people who have a lot of times these seminars go over a little bit. So people who need to leave at 11 or at noon, maybe we can pause briefly
Okay,
and then
let's do
leave,
that.
and then we can continue. Or whatever.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So so let me press forward. So if you accept that GSM is a worthwhile model for life cycles, of course, the next question is, let's be clear about what the semantics is. What really is supposed to happen when I've got all these ECA rules, okay? And so part of my setup then is, of course, I will talk about snapshots. And by the way, there's multiple business entity instances that are going to be related. I've just drawn one here. I'm going to get to several in just a moment. Okay, so I'm going to have a snapshot. And the snapshot is telling me, among other things, what's the status of the milestones and what's the status of the stages. Are they open or closed?